Hey everybody, it's Dr. Mark Hyman. I'm here in my office at Cleveland Clinic, and I'm just kind of comment on this whole coconut nuts thing. We have this crazy set of viral posts going on about how bad coconut oil is. It all derived from the media report in the USA Today, which basically says coconut oil is not healthy, it's never been healthy. Well, that is just a bunch of nonsense. In fact, it was really because the American Heart Association created a new report on dietary fats and heart disease. And here's how it goes. The idea is this: coconut oil is a saturated fat. Saturated fat raises LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol causes heart disease. Well, that is actually not true. In fact, LDL is just a bystander in the process of making heart disease, because when it's oxidized or damaged, then it becomes dangerous. And that happens in the context of an inflammatory diet, in the context of processed food, in the context of a high sugar carb diet. And the American Heart Association that made this claim has no evidence that coconut oil is dangerous. There's not a single study that shows it's dangerous. It's all hypothesis based on the idea of an outdated concept called the diet heart hypothesis, which is that heart disease is caused by cholesterol. And we now know it's caused by inflammation. We now know it's not just any type of cholesterol, it's a special kind of cholesterol that actually comes from eating sugar and starch, which causes prediabetes. That's what actually drives heart disease, not saturated fat. So we really have to look at a little bit at who's telling the story here. The American Heart Association, we think, is an independent organization, but it receives a large part of its funding from the food industry. In fact, if you look at their recommendations, they're telling you to eat low fat, which was bad, telling you not to eat eggs, which was a bad advice, and that's recently been completely exonerated by the new USDA dietary guidelines, which have been developed in 2015 that completely reversed 35 years of recommendations to eat a low-fat diet. They told us to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, cereal, and pasta every day. That's crazy, and that's what caused our obesity epidemic since 1980 when the guidelines started. And the 2015 guidelines, they said, look, we got that all wrong. It's not fat that causes heart disease. It's not fat that causes you to gain weight. And they reversed that and removed any limit at all on fat. They also said, oops, we kind of got it wrong on the whole cholesterol thing. In fact, cholesterol, you go ahead and eat your eggs and shrimp because it's no longer, quote, a nutrient of concern. And it was just dismissed as an issue. So there's no limits on dietary fat. There's no limits on dietary cholesterol in our diet, according now to the USDA guidelines, which is a very conservative group that makes these recommendations. Now, the American Heart Association tells us to eat a low-fat diet. It tells us to eat low-saturated fats. It tells us to eat a lot of vegetable oil. Now, how does that even make sense? This is something that's a new-to-nature substance. It's not something that actually existed for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years of our evolution. In fact, only about 100 years ago did we figure out how to refine oil, and now we refine it. We use hexane to extract it. We deodorize it. We heat it, and it's not a real food. It's a highly processed food. We've increased our intake of soybean oil 1,000 times. That's like 100,000% in the last 100 years. How could that make sense for our biology? And we know that people who actually consume omega-3 fats with omega-6 do okay. But those who just have the omega-6, the study shows that it really increases your risk of heart disease. So they're telling us don't eat butter or don't eat saturated fat like coconut oil, and eat a lot of vegetable oils. Well, that's the absolute wrong advice. In fact, there's been 17 meta-analyses showing that there's no link between saturated fat and heart disease. I mean, that's 17 different studies looking at all the studies, found no link. And they did find that there was a couple of studies that were quite interesting where they gave people olive oil, which, by the way, is 20% saturated fat. This was in Spain, 7,000 people, very hard to do these studies, and they gave them olive oil or nuts, and they gave them a low-fat diet. And the group that had the olive oil, which is 20% saturated fat, did so well that they actually had to cut the study off because it was dangerous not to give the people who were on the low-fat diet a higher fat diet. Another study was done 40 years ago. This one is my favorite, and it was suppressed in the basement because they didn't like the results. So some researchers recently from the NIH looked at the data, 9,000 people in mental institutions. They couldn't do that study now because it would be unethical, but they did it. And they found that in the people who had saturated fat versus the corn oil, did way better. In fact, the ones who had the corn oil lowered their LDL, like by a significant amount, and they increased the risk of heart disease. So for every 33 points, 30 points lowering of the LDL, the risk of heart attack went up by 20+%. So that means you eat corn oil or vegetable oil, you die. If you eat saturated fat, you live. And this is a very well done study that you couldn't even do. It's a randomized controlled trial, not like some of the other association studies. And so we really have to kind of rethink what we're doing. In fact, saturated fat raises the kind of cholesterol called large LDL and large HDL that actually is beneficial and doesn't cause heart attacks. So in fact, the quality of your cholesterol gets better with saturated fat. In fact, coconut oil raises HDL the most, and it decreases your total cholesterol HDL ratio, which is actually a better predictor of heart disease than LDL. So I don't know why they should, based on their whole cholesterol theory, they should actually think that coconut oil is good. And their populations have been consuming coconut oil for thousands of years, up to 60+% of their diet from coconut oil, and they do fine. There's no heart disease, there's no diabetes. I know I've written a lot about this. If you want to get all the references and look at all this data, I've written a book called Eat Fat, Get Thin. I also wrote a blog article, which is a little academic, but I go through all the research on why cholesterol is not the issue, why saturated fat is not the issue, and why low-fat diets are harmful, and why, in fact, certain fats actually help raise the good cholesterol called HDL. It's called Fat, What I Got Wrong, What I Got Right. I encourage you to read that if you want to be a little more nerdy about it. I also sort of want to point out that if you look at coconut oil, it actually has some interesting properties. It's not just saturated fat. It actually a special kind of saturated fat called lauric acid, which boosts the immune system. It also contains a special kind of saturated fat called MCT oil, which boosts your metabolism, increases your brain function. We use it in Alzheimer's, we're using it in weight loss, we're using it in all sorts of conditions that actually you need more energy and help boost the energy in your cells. It's a super fat. I use it before I work out. I mean, the more fat I eat, the more weight I lose, so I have to be careful. It also has biological properties, antifungal, immune-boosting properties. So I think it's a good part of a healthy diet. Now, what I would say to you is this: just because broccoli is good, you wouldn't eat only broccoli or have it be 80% of your diet. You'd get sick. Same thing with coconut oil. It's not like just a free food. You want to include it in your diet, but not as a staple. It's just part of your diet. It's great for high temperature cooking. It's great if you people using I use it in my coffee sometimes. Well, I've stopped drinking coffee, but I used to. And it's really a very powerful food. So I wouldn't let all the headlines scare you. In fact, when you look at the media reports, 50% of the time, this was a New England Journal article, 50% of the time the media gets the studies wrong. And it's sort of disappointing that journalists aren't more active in being investigative journalists. They're just reporting the kind of party line of various organizations or various things that they see, but they're not really doing the deep, heavy work of finding out what's really going on. So I encourage you to do your own research. I encourage you to try it yourself. I encourage you to think that just because you read something in the media doesn't mean it's true. And you have to look at who's doing it, who's funding it, what's going on. I mean, the American Heart Association is in bed with the pharma companies for the statins. They're in bed with vegetable oil companies. They are getting in bed with the cereal makers. I mean, cereal is 75% sugar, most breakfast cereals. They're not really breakfast, they're dessert. And they do cause significant issues. And I think people think they're healthy, but they're really not. So I'm super excited to share this with you. I encourage you to read my blog about this. I encourage you to read Eat Fat, Get Thin and the Fat, What I Got Wrong, What I Got Right article. But just the bottom line is the whole theory of the diet heart hypothesis that saturated fat causes high LDL, that causes heart disease, is been disproven. And it's not my opinion. It's the opinion of all the experts. I mean, the guy who's the dean of Tufts Medical School is profound researcher, Darius Mazafarian. I asked him, as I was talking to him, I said, Darius, if you had to choose between a bagel and butter, which would you choose? He said, I'd choose the butter. I mean, in fact, he was part of a lead author on a paper which looked at all the studies on butter over the last few decades, and they looked at 6.5 million patient years. 6.5 million patient years. And they found absolutely no link between butter and heart disease, and they found an inverse link between butter and diabetes. So basically, butter in your blood helps prevent and reverse diabetes. All right, well, I wish I could talk to you about all this tonight, but I got to go eat some saturated fat. and have dinner, and we'll talk more soon. Take care, everybody.